So, quite a while ago, I randomly stumbled upon this tweet where this guy was asking what was up with the sheer amount of flooding levels and puzzles back in early 2000s, late 1990s game design. It was something I never really thought of, and reading this made me go like, yeah, what was up with that? So, I'm the video game guy on YouTube. I dug into this. Doing a little bit of research, I found there to be very few articles diving into this topic, and surprisingly not a single YouTube video discussing it. It was more so videos about water mechanics and its evolution in general. But I think this is actually a pretty interesting topic to talk about, because there's so much more to it than just some lazy copy and paste design or whatever other reason. So, let's talk about it. Back in the early 2000s, flooding puzzles were mostly following the same formula. Though there were exceptions, these puzzles were mostly seen in the puzzle and adventure genre, with some outliers in like horror or even some action games. You'd have to raise or lower water levels to, i.e., open up new areas or make certain objects afloat. Pretty simple stuff. However, they are way more interesting than meets the eye, because they weren't so prevalent because of their easy design or devs lazily being like, yo, here's a stupid ass puzzle to keep your stupid ass busy, man. Nah. There are actually various valid reasons behind including them, and unsurprisingly it all has to do with the hardware limitations of its time, both from a functional and graphical perspective. The limited hardware of its time meant limited worlds. It simply wasn't possible to cram huge worlds into these cartridges, these suboptimal cartridges. This resulted in a certain lack of depth and or replayability that then had to be compensated for via more interesting mechanics or storylines, which admittedly most definitely didn't always hit its mark. Changing the same areas by using a body of water wasn't effective to combat this. Using water to flood levels transformed the environment, turning these static-ass looking-ass rooms into evolving spaces. You'd be able to use the same room in different states, so to speak. From dry to partially submerged to completely flooded. It allowed any developer team to squeeze every last drop out of a room without requiring new geometry or anything like that. I'd call it very economical on the hardware side, as you would only need to load one room at a time, just filling more of the room with volumetric objects, aka some water. You could just reuse the same old assets instead of creating new ones, but give them a whole new different purpose through yoinking in a bit of water. It changed the entire dynamic of a room and added the depth and replayability the hardware pretty much prohibited. It wasn't used just because of hardware limitations though, but also as an intentional gameplay mechanic and or enhancement. Though they did actually do this because of hardware limitations in other areas of game design. These old-ass games couldn't rely on beautiful graphics or S-tier voice acting to impress literally anyone, so flooding puzzles were their attempts at doing so. It was an early form of systemic gameplay, changing the world in a dynamic and meaningful way through interactivity. Something we see a lot and obviously much more fleshed out in modern open-world games, like i.e. Breath of the Wild with unlimited amounts of environmental manipulation. It was meant to intentionally slow the player down because of having to think and observe before acting. It added a layer of strategy and even a bit of resource management. It was a way to challenge your mental mapping and problem-solving ability, because you obviously had to track what made what possible and where. It made you think critically about interacting with the environment, and thus let you sponge up the area far more than you ever would otherwise. This created a newfound sense of weight and atmosphere in like temples, ruins or dungeons. It enhanced immersion. This could go both ways, as flooding could also be used without player control to add a sense of urgency, where something is flooding and you need to find a way out as quickly as possible, which in turn adds a bit of emotional weight. But the funniest, and what I pretend is the most important reason for including flooding levels, is the developers just wanting to flex physics. Like, fuck yeah, bitch, we got water and shit is kinda floating. The future is here, old man. Water physics for a while were the impressive thing about a lot of 3D engines. It used to be difficult as hell to render, and thus having good water was a way to show you had a banger developer team, and obviously game. That's also why so many games were strangely beach-like and had fucking pools and lakes everywhere for no damn reason. Just to flex. So that is the multi-layered why, met with a multi-layered reception. It is some of the most polarizing game design I can personally think of. You either appreciate what it's trying to do, or you fucking hate its tedious bullshit. There seems to be no neutral stance to be found. Anywhere. The water level in Ocarina of Time is the most well-known example of just this type of puzzle. It is widely hated because of its complexity, yet loved for that very same complexity by others. In this labyrinth, you must raise and lower the water to open new areas, reveal treasures and reach ledges and doors. Constantly fiddling with water levels can start feeling repetitive and tedious for some, while others view it as a layer of depth and some sort of a challenge. Whole ass articles and YouTube videos have been made and written about its genius, and also why it's the worst level of all time ever created ever. Me, personally, I love that polarizing bullshit. And me, personally, I am on the positive side, as it's one of the more entertaining flooding levels, in my opinion. I think that is the unpopular opinion, and I don't care. But then, on the flip side, you have like Resident Evil straight up trolling with these lazy ass flood and or drain puzzles where you just have to line up a few boxes in a straight line and raise the water level to progress without any strategical depth or fun to it. Or more notoriously, the widely accepted to be meh wet dry world in Mario 64, where they somehow thought it was a cool idea to have the initial water height determined by how high you jumped into the level, and then raise or lower the water level via 7 of these colored crystals spread throughout the environment. It sucks fat balls to find the exact crystal you need, and if the water level is high, its slow movement will make sure swimming down to find the right crystal will take just long enough to annoy the shit out of you. So yeah, the variance is pretty high. Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit. It's pretty funny how flooding puzzles like these were pretty much the status quo for a while though, considering there is so much more you can do with water functionally while still achieving the same levels of showing off, slowing down and creating atmosphere. You can, like, I don't know, turn it into ice like they do in Avatar, and switch it back to liquid. Use it for weight puzzles. Redirect the flow of a river or a general water stream. Sea, I don't know. But they were just like, nah, let's flood this shit. It's a mechanic that has evolved into more intuitive puzzles and way cooler use of flooding in more modern games, where these water physics are used in a way to prevent frustration for those not fond of flooding mechanics, which I still believe to be the vast majority. I think, for example, a Signalis has a very cool reservoir drainage puzzle, where the goal is to equalize the water levels in these three tanks. It's a brain breaker to the extent of needing a whole ass guide explaining its solution, but it's a mad clever puzzle, if you ask me. And then you have a game like Still Wakes the Deep, taking flooding to a whole new level entirely by taking place in a flooded oil rig, almost always surrounded by water. Due to new technology and evolving flooding ideas, this feels menacing and realistic, adding a sense of claustrophobia and a fear of death. Pretty much a perfect horror setting. So yeah, even today, flooding puzzles are still very much a thing, but obviously much better due to larger teams with more creative minds and much better technology to pull off the coolest shit. It's not the status quo anymore like it kinda used to be though. But yeah, this was a fun little game mechanic to dive into and yap about, learning about the technical, functional and graphical reasons behind adding flooding puzzles to a game. It never ceases to amaze me how much depth there is behind even the simplest things. Deliberately adding a body of water for a multitude of game-enhancing reasons you'd honestly never even think about as a player. Or, you know, you could be Tomb Raider too, and make it the worst puzzle in the game for no reason.